The Voyagers were guaranteed to work only until the Saturn encounter. I thought it might be a good idea, just after Saturn, to have them take one last glance homeward. From Saturn, I knew, the Earth would appear too small for Voyager to make out any detail. Our planet would be just a point of light, a lonely pixel, hardly distinguishable from the many other points of light Voyager would see, nearby planets, far-off suns. But precisely because of the obscurity of our world thus revealed, such a picture might be worth having.
But why, some say, the moon?
Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Why climb the highest mountain? Why fly the Atlantic? To go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Consider again that dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every hunter and forager, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, inventor and explorer, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there.
The greater our knowledge increases, the greater our ignorance unfolds.
The Earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena.
The vast stretches of the unknown and the unanswered and the unfinished still far outstrip our collective comprehension. Thoth was not built by those who waited and rested. Man in his quest for knowledge and progress is determined and cannot be deterred.
The Earth is the only world known so far to harbor life.
The eyes of the world now look into space.
To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another. The Earth is where we make our stand.
All right, it is now time. It is the moment we've been waiting for a long time, and it is time to deliver Model S. Yes!
The 21st century saw a multitude of innovations for the human race. One of the most disruptive was the advent of the electric vehicle. In the early 21st century, car manufacturers began transitioning away from combustion engines to electric-powered vehicles. A new power unit, however, meant a new source of energy was needed. Enter lithium. Lithium-ion batteries emerged as the dominant power unit due to their stability and efficiency. Where oil was the calling card of wealth and opulence for the last century, whoever now controlled lithium production would hold tremendous sway over global affairs. One of the major sources supplying the world's lithium at the time came from the Lithium Triangle, a section of land that spanned the nations of Chile, Bolivia, and Argentina. It was estimated this area of land contained more than 50% of the world's lithium reserves. The increased production drew the eyes of the world to South America. In 2032, citing the U.S.'s destabilization of the Middle East in the late 20th century, Argentina proposed the Lithium Triangle be made a shared economic zone. The three countries would pool resources and share profits between them, so as to better ward off foreign intervention. Chile rejected the proposal outright. Argentina's initial plans called for equal profit sharing between the nations. Chile, being the single largest exporter of the three, had no desire to sacrifice their earnings to appease the others. Bolivia and Argentina agreed to terms and formed a shared economic zone between them. With pooled resources, lithium mining became more efficient. Chile's hold on production began to wane, and the growing tension between the countries saw prices increase. This caused worldwide nations to look for alternative sources of lithium, namely Australia and China. On May 22nd, Chilean President Ignacio Vidal petitioned Bolivia and Argentina to dissolve their economic zone. Neither country responded to this plea. With production waning and his country's GDP falling, Ignacio Vidal turned to more extreme measures. On July 6, 2035, Chilean forces invaded Bolivia and took control of the Uyuni salt flat. This prompted several condemnations from world leaders and institutions. Bolivia struggled to repel Chile's advances, and on August 10th, the Chilean military seized control of La Paz. Fortunately, though, Bolivian President Sergio Ortiz Mendez managed to flee the capital before it fell. Through a series of journeys beyond the scope of this history, Ortiz Mendez found himself in Santa Cruz de la Sierra, where he helped organize a resistance force to combat their occupiers. Chile's ambitions were clear. They aimed to take control of the lithium supply in South America. Once they occupied Bolivia, their sights would turn to Argentina. Fearing this, Argentine President Rodrigo Romano decided to act proactively. On August 17th, Argentine forces bombarded the Antofagasta airbase, taking out one of Chile's launching points for future campaigns. Desiring to mount an offensive attack, Sergio Ortiz Mendez petitioned to combine his forces with the Argentine to take back the Uyuni salt flats and then La Paz. Rodrigo Romano agreed, and the forces began to move for Uyuni. They met resistance at Tupiza, where the largest battle of this conflict took place. For 3 days and 3 nights, war enraptured the small town. It has been said that during that time, the sun never set on Tupiza. Such was the frequency of the bombardment and torment. In the end, Bolivian and Argentine forces emerged victorious, but not without considerable casualties. 3 weeks later, on January 2nd, 2036, the Uyuni salt flats were retaken by the Bolivian and Argentine. This signaled a turning point in the war. Public support was high for the Bolivians, and the taking back of their salt flat was seen as a tremendous victory. While Sergio Ortiz Mendez aimed to continue his campaign to retake La Paz, Rodrigo Romano was still wanting to prevent a Chilean invasion of Argentina. Wanting to keep pressure on Vidal, Argentine forces invaded Chile on May 11th through the city of Portillo. Ignacio Vidal, losing ground in Bolivia and now having to contend with the Argentine invasion, was desperate for a show of force. He ordered the bombardment of the Olaroz lithium facility in Argentina. On June 29th, the orders were carried out, and Chilean forces destroyed the facility, wiping out one of Argentina's largest economic drivers. Romano's response would be swift and severe. On July 12th, Argentine pilots began a series of bombardments on Santiago, Chile's capital city. These bombings devastated the city, killing thousands, including civilians. Back in Bolivia, Ortiz Mendez was gaining ground with his freedom fighters as they inched closer to the capital. Using guerrilla tactics, the Bolivians were able to stealth around the Chileans. Bolivian soldiers slowly began trickling into La Paz and entrenching themselves in the city, blending in with civilians. Then, they waited. On the morning of August 3rd, Bolivian freedom fighters emerged from hiding, led by President Sergio Ortiz Mendez. Catching the Chileans unaware, they were able to fight their way through the city and recapture the Casa Grande del Pueblo by midday. Ortiz Mendez had successfully executed his campaign to take back Bolivia. Their victories were cheered the world over. The Chileans attempted several countermaneuvers, but none were successful. The Bolivians were entrenched and motivated to hold their homeland. On August 16th, Ignacio Vidal ordered the withdrawal of forces from Bolivia and Argentina, bringing the Lithium War to an end. On August 23rd, Vidal was arrested in Santiago and extradited to Bolivia to stand trial for his crimes. The first hearing of Ignacio Vidal was held in La Paz on September 5th. Ortiz Mendez and a panel of judges presided over the hearing. Also standing trial, however, was Rodrigo Romano. Romano was arrested in Buenos Aires on September 10th and extradited to Chile to stand trial for his bombardment of Santiago. Ortiz Mendez testified in the trial of Romano, saying, "This man helped me retake my homeland, and for that I will forever be in his debt. But his actions resulted in the deaths of thousands of civilians, and this cannot be overlooked, nor can it be atoned for." Romano's verdict came first, with the Chilean court finding him guilty of war crimes on December 27th and sentenced to 30 years imprisonment. Attention now turned to La Paz. Many were wondering what punishment the Bolivians would give their invader. Rumors of a death sentence persisted. On January 10th, 2037, Ignacio Vidal was found guilty of war crimes against the nations of Bolivia and Argentina. President Sergio Ortiz Mendez sentenced him to life imprisonment. This sentence was heralded the world over as a profound act of mercy and maturity. The Lithium Triangle was declared to be a shared economic zone between Chile, Bolivia, and Argentina. While Argentina worked to rebuild its lithium facility, Bolivia would oversee the operations of both the Uyuni and Atacama salt flats. The Lithium War, while short-lived, had a tremendous and irrevocable impact on 21st century advancement. The devastated salt flats and destabilized region severely limited global lithium production. It is estimated that the widespread adoption of electric-powered machinery was set back at least a decade resulting from the conflict. This only exacerbated a changing climate. Indeed, the warming of our planet that began with the Industrial Revolution saw attempts at remediation in the 21st century. Legislation reform as well as disruptive industries brought increased awareness to climate change. Unfortunately, most of these initiatives were targeted at individuals. Little to no regulation was placed on corporations. The decline in lithium production saw motor vehicles return to the combustion engine in the early 2040s. These factors compounded over the following decades. Even as lithium productions returned to pre-war levels, the damage appeared to be done. Global temperatures had risen, and by the mid-2060s, ocean levels were almost a foot higher than they were at the turn of the century. Prolonged droughts were common. Wildfires and hurricanes increased in frequency and power. By 2096, our planet found itself to be warmer by an average of 3 degrees Celsius, enough that we had to steal Arctic life away to sanctuaries to prevent their extinction. In 2098, disaster struck. As large chunks of the ice caps melted and ocean levels rose over 2 feet, the resulting floods shocked coastal cities and nations. Cuba, the Maldives, Haiti, and more island nations were obliterated. Miami, New Orleans, Dubai, Venice, and other major cities across the world were devastated. The death toll of these events has never been confirmed, but estimates place the number north of 5 million. Global economies crumbled, and humanity experienced the worst recession since the advent of currency. As is often the case, however, the sobering reality of these events provided a much-needed call to arms. Legislation was passed in over 100 nations, enacting strict emission caps on all companies. Violating this cap would result in the banning of sale of a company's goods. Solar, hydro, and wind power became standard practice across the world. Flights were restricted to business purposes only. Personal flights were allotted once every 5 years. Public transit saw a major overhaul. These efforts introduced hundreds of thousands of jobs to the market. The process was slow, but by the early 22nd century, the scars were beginning to heal. By the mid-century, economies and nations had finally stabilized. Just in time for it all to come crashing down. We now know the full story of how humanity came to understand it is not alone in this galaxy. It is important to remember, however, that at the time, these events took place behind locked doors, with secret conferences and backroom deals. And while this does not excuse the way humanity reacted, it might serve to explain. On November 18th, 2145, scientists at the McMurk Research Center received an unidentified RF signal from deep space. The signal was not in any language they understood or could translate, but it clearly denoted some form of complex language. It was assumed that scientists at China's Martian Research Center received the same signal. The information was quickly passed off to Washington to decide how to act. Those on Capitol Hill, though, decided to do nothing. The information was considered top secret, known only to a few. It was assumed Beijing likewise knew of this broadcast. And so, the two governments waited, daring the other to buckle first. For 11 months, nothing. No word of this revelation was shared with the public. No response was given. Then, on October 24th, 2146, the U.S. Post ran an article claiming the White House had been sitting on evidence of an extraterrestrial intelligence for the better part of a year. Among the public, this sparked widespread paranoia and mistrust. Inside the White House, however, a full-blown manhunt was underway. Somebody had leaked the information to the press, and heads were fixed to roll. A 2-week investigation saw everyone from the president to the janitorial staff turn over every document they had written, note every hand they had shaken, communication records, bank statements, any and everything. In the end, Connor Barnes was identified as the mole. He attempted to flee custody, but was arrested at the Raleigh-Durham International Airport. On November 12th, President Elliott Wright took to the airwaves from the Oval Office and declared, "On November the 18th, 2145, U.S. researchers at the Michael Collins International Research Center on Mars received radio communications from an extraterrestrial entity. It is unknown to us at this time what level of intelligence these people possess, but it can be reasonably assumed to be vast. The United States has not yet issued a response to this message, as their intentions have not been made clear. Rest assured, my fellow Americans, I will exhaust every resource to protect the lives, liberties, and interests of the American people." The message was met with mixed reactions. Paranoia turned to panic. Mistrust turned to hysteria. Across the globe, people rioted. The Earth had only recently recovered from the ecological disasters of the late 21st century. To be met with such a divulgence now pushed too many over the edge. Martial law had to be declared in 32 cities across the United States. In Europe, hundreds of thousands flocked to the Vatican to hear the Pope's proclamation of the rapture. Interestingly, no word came from Beijing. The White House was sure China had received the same signal they had, so why were they silent on it? Less than 2 weeks later, the United Nations convened to hold the Summit for Extraterrestrial Relations, wherein they would decide how best to respond to these circumstances. Many wanted to respond to the communications. Others wanted to ignore it. United Kingdom Ambassador Theo Chapman spoke in favor of responding, citing the Voyager missions of the 20th century, missions specifically designed to make contact with extraterrestrial life. Not all shared the optimism, though. French Ambassador Enzo Kobler claimed that without having an accurate assessment of this species' intentions, intelligence, technological, and militaristic capabilities, the risk posed by inviting them to Earth was too great. Debates seemed to be heading in circles. Those in favor were called naive, those opposed, scared. It was most likely the testimony of Canadian ecology student Anderson Meyer that swayed the vote. In a heartfelt address, he said,
"It is life's great purpose to seek life. From our biological need to procreate to our existential desire to seek companionship. Since crawling out of the caves, mankind has sought answers to the nature of our existence. We've looked to the skies and seen gods, seen ancestors, seen divine spirits and guiding shepherds. But now we see life. We see opportunity, and where you might see an enemy, I see an ally. Someone who can aid us, can teach us, can live with us. We've spent hundreds of thousands of years wondering if there is life beyond our planet. Now we know. It is not a matter of discussion. We have a responsibility to science, to imagination, to the human spirit, to society, to curiosity itself, to meet them. I implore you, when making this decision, to think beyond the worst-case scenario."
In the end, the vote passed 8-7 in favor of responding to the signal. Mathematicians, linguists, and physicists worked for weeks to figure out what to say and how to say it. To their demise, though, it would all prove for naught, when on January 1st, 2147, the Hongse Tiangtong Mars Research Lab broadcast a response to the signal. Several nations spoke up in protest at this unsanctioned message, but China assured them that it was a message of peace and communication. For good measure, NASA too responded to the signal a few days later. Then, they waited. With bated breath, humanity lingered on a response. Perhaps it was this period of unease that did it. Perhaps it was media outlets seeding doubt. For whatever reason, though, public opinion began to sway. It is possible the general public thought a response would be received shortly. When it did not, a sense of tension set in. Slowly, as the days turned to weeks, the idea of, did we make the right decision, began to become more top of mind. By the time a second RF signal was received on March 10th, calls for mobilization were heard. And this time, it was not just the general public. China and the United Kingdom began activating their Space Force battalions. The United States soon joined them by way of executive order. This stirred up quite a controversy across the globe. The European Space Agency and the Indian Space Research Organization condemned the three nations for their efforts, claiming they were operating against the agreed-upon course of action. Protesters took to the streets en masse, with Washington, D.C., London, and Beijing seeing some of the largest gatherings ever held. For the second time in as many years, martial law was declared. Between the three nations, more than 1,000 fighter units and 2,000 armed troops waited between Earth and the endless abyss. On April 17th, 2147, alien species entered the Sol system for the first time. Appearing about 20,000 miles past the moon, the Alliance Expeditionary Force arrived in the system aboard the AAN Argon, a D-class destroyer vessel that had been retrofitted for exploration. We know now that the Argon was not a military vessel and crewed almost entirely by civilians. We know now that the dozens of escort shuttles accompanying the Argon were there to stave off pirates or would-be hijackers. We know now that there were families aboard that ship. We know this now. We did not know it then. The human forces attempted communication, but quickly abandoned those ideas in favor of an all-out assault. Using a series of fast, coordinated attacks, human forces were able to scramble the escort shuttles and isolate the destroyer. A cargo shuttle then docked with the Argon and allowed a squad of US soldiers to board the vessel. While initial enemy contact was light, the aliens eventually moved to defend themselves. Human forces pressed the attack and detonated 4 explosive devices, taking out the ship's life support systems, its communications array, and puncturing its hull. Once all was done, 11 humans numbered the dead. Of the aliens, 206 lives were lost. Manifest would later tell us 27 of them were children. On April 18th, 2147, the Alliance Auxiliary Navy arrived at Earth in force, massing a fleet of 14 destroyers, 2 dreadnoughts, and thousands of fighters. The show of force was effective, humanity, knowing itself to be outclassed by every definition of the word, surrendered. President Wright, President King Yang, and Prime Minister Collins were all impeached and arrested for their unprompted assault on an intelligent life form. Singaporean Prime Minister Leong Ming was chosen to oversee peace talks with the aliens. April 21st, in the year 2147, will be remembered as one of the most significant dates in human history, as it was the day humans welcomed alien life to Earth for the first time. At 1430 hours, a transport shuttle from the AAN Aziath descended on Earth and touched down on the tarmac at the Singapore Changi Airport. Unprecedented even by galactic standards, the emissary sent was none other than High Counselor Verserk Omsk of the Alliance Supreme High Council. The political hierarchy of intergalactic institutions is beyond the scope of this history. Suffice it to say, though, the High Counselor's presence was an anomaly. Omsk explained the situation the humans found themselves in. By hijacking and destroying an Alliance ship and killing over 200 civilians, the humans committed an act of terror that could merit a declaration of war. Under normal circumstances, the Alliance would make the humans sign the Return Accords, barring them from participating in galactic affairs and confining their species to Earth. Omsk, however, seemed to speak from a place of advocacy. Through the High Counselor's endorsement, Earth was given a second chance. After a period of 1 galactic year, the Alliance would reconvene to determine what was to be done about the humans. This did little to calm tensions on Earth. So much uncertainty led to fear, and fear led to chaos. Order was needed, and unprecedented problems called for unprecedented solutions. In a radical bid, it was proposed that the United States, Canada, France, and the United Kingdom merge their borders and form the United Republic of Earth. Countless countries spoke up in protest, but initial reactions skewed positive. The argument was that the combined resources would allow for a universal governing body that would placate the alliance. Detractors argued that a single governing body would be too powerful and hold too much sway. Nonetheless, the 4 countries agreed to the initial proposal. The process in which these countries are to be merged is a mess of complexities and procedures. Rumors of another super-state being formed between China, Russia, and South Korea have swirled, but thus far amounted only to conspiracy. Which brings us to today, where humanity currently stands. We wait. We wait to see what becomes of this uneasy treaty we've formed amongst ourselves. We wait to see what verdict is rendered on us from those whose powers we cannot hope to comprehend. The story of humanity is one of perseverance, tenacity, and relentless determination. It is a story of destruction, pain, and sorrow, but also a story of love, creativity, and passion. Of a people so bold and daring, no bounds can hold them. From Renaissance to World War, from pandemics to Olympics, we've soared to the highest heights, plunged the deepest depths. We've known victory and defeat in equal measure. Too often, the largest hurdle we've had to overcome has been ourselves, for human nature is a precarious thing. It can drive us to create wonders and terrors alike. But for all we have achieved thus far, it's what we'll do next that will truly define us.